Welcome to UK Stories, Episode 2. Today, we're delving into the quiet battles and hard-won victories that often hide beneath the headlines. We're talking about the real people, facing real financial challenges, right across the UK.
And Kate, these are the stories that really stick with you, aren't they? Because they could be any one of us, facing these exact same hurdles.
Absolutely, Mark. And our first story today really highlights that stark reality. Imagine looking at your monthly budget, knowing it's already stretched to breaking point, and then hearing the news that another £332 a year is about to vanish into thin air.
OF. That's a punch to the gut for anyone, but especially if you're already on the edge, counting every single penny.
Exactly. That was the crushing reality for Chloe, a 33-year-old single mum from Bristol. Chloe works part-time as a teaching assistant, a job she absolutely loves. She finds it incredibly rewarding, but let's be honest, it's not exactly a high earner. She's got two incredible kids, 8-year-old Leo and 5-year-old Mia, and she's always done everything she possibly can to make ends meet, to give them a good life, despite the constant squeeze.
So she's already juggling rent, food, school uniforms, maybe a few carefully planned treats for the kids. It all adds up so quickly, doesn't it? And there's rarely any wiggle room.
It really does. And Chloe's always been incredibly frugal. She's the queen of batch cooking. She hunts for yellow sticker bargains in the supermarket like a hawk. She makes absolutely sure every light is off, every plug is out when not in use. Heating is a luxury, especially in winter. She remembers last year, she'd often put on an extra jumper or even wrap herself in a thick blanket on the sofa, just to avoid turning the thermostat up. She always prioritized the kids, making absolutely sure they were warm and comfortable, even if she wasn't.
That's just heartbreaking, isn't it? Sacrificing your own comfort, day in and day out, for your children.
It really is. And then, around March of this year, she heard the news. The energy regulator, Ofgem, was forecasting another significant rise in energy bills, coming in July. An average increase of £332 over the year. She told me she just sat there, staring at the television, feeling this cold, heavy dread spread through her chest. It wasn't just a number, it was less food on the table, it was the kids having to wear extra layers even inside, it was the constant, nagging worry gnawing at her peace of mind.
So what was her very first thought? What goes through your mind when you hear something like that, knowing you're already at your limit?
She said her immediate thought was, how? How on earth am I going to do this? She'd already cut everything she possibly could. There were no more luxuries to trim, no fat left to cut from the budget. Her old car, a trusty Ford Fiesta, was absolutely essential for getting to work and school, so she couldn't give that up. Food banks were already a regular, albeit humbling, part of her life. She felt this wave of shame, she said, this deep embarrassment, even though she knew deep down it wasn't her fault. It was just overwhelming. Like being caught in a rising tide with no land in sight.
I can only imagine. That must have been terrifying. So, what did she do? Did she just resign herself to it, or did she find a way to fight back against that feeling of powerlessness?
Well, for a few days, she did feel resigned. She felt utterly powerless. But then, she told me, she looked at Leo and Mia playing in the living room, completely oblivious, just absorbed in their games, and something clicked inside her. She wasn't going to let this defeat her. She wasn't going to let them see her crumble. She started researching, feverishly, late into the night. She looked into every single government support scheme, every local charity, every obscure grant she could find. She discovered a grant scheme through her local council for energy efficiency improvements. It felt like a long shot, a tiny glimmer of hope, but she applied.
And did it work? Did that long shot pay off?
It did, Mark, but it wasn't easy. The application process was incredibly complicated, lots of forms, demanding proof of income, copies of old bills, detailed explanations. She spent hours on it after the kids were asleep, often falling asleep at the kitchen table with a pen in her hand. But a few weeks later, she got a call. Her application had been approved for partial funding towards better insulation in her flat and a more efficient boiler.
Wow! That's incredible. What an enormous relief that must have been.
An enormous relief. She told me it wasn't a magic fix, her bills still went up, and she still has to be incredibly careful with every kilowatt. But the improvements meant that the increase wasn't as utterly devastating as it could have been. She's still battling, still making sacrifices, but she feels like she has a little more control, a little more breathing room, and crucially, a warmer home for her children. It showed her that even when things feel impossible, there might be a solution if you're willing to fight for it.
What an inspiring story, Kate. It really underscores how these big economic shifts, these global events, translate into real, everyday struggles for families like Chloe's right here in the UK.
It absolutely does. Mark, our next one is a story I couldn't stop thinking about because it highlights a different kind of financial pressure, one that stems from something much closer to home. It's a story about trust, and about how easily it can be broken.
You know, Kate, there's a subtle kind of theft that leaves you feeling more than just shortchanged. It leaves you feeling utterly violated, completely betrayed.
That's a powerful way to put it.
It is. And it's exactly how Liam, a 22-year-old from Manchester, felt. Liam had been working part-time at a local independent coffee shop since he was 19. He loved the atmosphere, the familiar faces of the regulars, the comforting smell of fresh coffee and pastries. He was diligently saving up for a deposit on a rental flat with his girlfriend, hoping to finally move out of his parents' place. Every single penny counted for him.
Of course. And minimum wage is designed to be a safety net, a fundamental protection, to ensure everyone earns a fair living for their work.
Exactly. Liam knew what the minimum wage was, broadly. He'd seen the official figures for his age bracket. But he always just assumed his boss, Mr. Henderson, a seemingly friendly, jovial man who ran the shop with a booming laugh, was paying him correctly. Why wouldn't he be? It was a small, local business, not some big, faceless corporation. He trusted him.
So, he just trusted him implicitly. That's a common trap, isn't it? Especially when you're young, maybe it's one of your first proper jobs, and you're just happy to have the work.
Totally. He was earning just under £10 an hour, which seemed reasonable to him at the time, especially with tips on top. He was happy, he felt valued. But then, in April of this year, the new minimum wage rates came out. And Liam, out of pure curiosity, checked them online. He saw that for someone his age, the new legal rate was over £11 an hour. He thought, great, a pay rise is coming.
So he was expecting that to be reflected immediately in his very next paycheck.
He was. But when his payslip came through at the end of April, his hourly rate hadn't changed. It was still the same £10 an hour. He shrugged it off at first, thinking maybe it was a simple mistake, or that the boss was just a bit slow to implement it. But then he saw an article online, talking about how hundreds of firms were being fined for failing to pay the minimum wage. And a cold, sinking dread settled in his stomach.
Oh, that pit of the stomach feeling. He must have connected the dots immediately, and that innocent shrug turned into a terrifying realization.
He did. He went back and looked at his old payslips, doing the maths very carefully. He realized that for months, possibly even years, he'd been paid less than the legal minimum. Not by a huge amount each week, a few pounds here, a few pounds there, but it absolutely added up. Over 3 years, it was hundreds, maybe even over £1,000. Money he'd worked for, money he'd needed for his flat deposit, just gone. Stolen.
That's absolutely infuriating. What did he do? Did he confront his boss, or was he too scared?
He did, but it wasn't easy. He told me he was absolutely terrified of losing his job. He loved the place, he loved his colleagues, and he didn't want to cause trouble or be labeled a troublemaker. But the feeling of being cheated, of being taken advantage of being undervalued, was ultimately stronger than his fear. So, he plucked up the courage. He went to Mr. Henderson and politely, but firmly, asked about the new minimum wage and why his pay hadn't changed.
And what was the boss's reaction? Did he deny it?
Mr. Henderson apparently got very defensive, very quickly. He mumbled something about small businesses struggling and too much paperwork and I'll get around to it. He tried to brush Liam off. But Liam had come prepared. He had printouts of the minimum wage rates, calculations of what he was owed. He stood his ground. He said he felt like his heart was pounding out of his chest, but he just kept thinking about all those extra shifts, all that hard work he'd put in, for less than he deserved.
Good for him. That takes real courage, especially when you're facing someone in a position of power, someone who controls your livelihood.
It really does. In the end, Mr. Henderson reluctantly agreed to adjust Liam's pay going forward, starting from that day. But he absolutely refused to backdate any of the owed wages, claiming he couldn't afford it and that Liam should be grateful. Liam, feeling defeated but also a little bit victorious for even getting that far, decided to leave it there. He started quietly looking for another job.
But that's not quite the end of the story, is it?
No, it's not. A few weeks later, Liam saw a news report about a specific list of companies that had been fined for minimum wage breaches, following an investigation. And to his shock, there was Mr. Henderson's coffee shop on the list. The authorities had clearly been investigating the business for some time. It turned out Mr. Henderson had been underpaying several of his staff for years, not just Liam.
So, he wasn't just doing it to Liam, this was a systemic issue.
Exactly. Liam told me he felt this strange, powerful mix of anger and vindication. Anger that his boss had so brazenly lied and cheated, but vindication that he wasn't alone, and that justice, in some form, was finally being served. He even received a letter a few months later, informing him that he would be reimbursed for a portion of the unpaid wages, as part of the fines levied against the company. It wasn't everything he was owed, but it was something.
That's a powerful lesson in standing up for yourself, isn't it? And in the fact that sometimes, even if it feels like a long shot, the system does eventually catch up.
Absolutely. It's a crucial reminder that we all need to know our rights, and not be afraid to speak up when something feels fundamentally wrong. Even if it's just a few pounds an hour, it adds up, and it's your hard-earned money.
Precisely. And speaking of hard-earned money, Mark, our next story touches on a milestone that's becoming increasingly difficult for so many people across the UK. It's a story about dreams, about endless perseverance, and the constantly shifting goalposts of adulthood.
Yeah, Kate. 34. It's just a number, isn't it? Unless it's the average age you finally manage to scrape together enough for your very first home. For many, it feels like an almost impossible summit to reach.
And for so many, it's even older than that. This story is about Aisha and Ben, a fantastic couple from South London, both in their mid-30s. Aisha is a dedicated primary school teacher. Ben works in digital marketing. They've been together for 10 years, married for 5, and for most of that time, their shared dream has been to own their own place. To have a space that's truly theirs.
And that's a dream that feels increasingly out of reach for so many people in their generation. The property market just seems to get tougher and tougher. The price is always rising faster than salaries, doesn't it?
It really does. They started saving properly about 7 years ago, thinking they'd be in a really good position by their early 30s. They were incredibly disciplined. No lavish holidays, eating out was a rare, carefully budgeted treat, nights in with friends were the norm. They even made the huge decision to move back in with Aisha's parents for a year to save on rent, which they both said was incredibly challenging for their independence and their relationship, but absolutely necessary if they wanted any hope of reaching their goal.
That's a huge sacrifice. Living with parents in your late 20s, early 30s, when you're married, that takes real dedication and a lot of patience from everyone involved.
It does. And they saved diligently. Every bonus, every spare penny went straight into that savings account. They watched the property market like hawks, constantly checking listings, reading reports. They'd go to open houses, get excited about a potential place, then see prices jump again within weeks. They told me it felt like they were running on a treadmill, always moving, always working hard, but never quite catching up to the ever-receding finish line. Every time they thought they had enough for a decent deposit, the average house price in their preferred area would just creep up another 10, 20, sometimes even £30,000.
The goalposts just kept moving further away. That must have been incredibly frustrating, soul-destroying even. Did they ever feel like throwing in the towel?
Aisha admitted there were moments of deep despair. She told me about one time, after a particularly disheartening viewing where they were outbid by a cash buyer, she just broke down crying in the car. She said, "Are we ever going to get there? Are we going to be renting forever, watching all our money disappear into someone else's pocket?" Ben was always the pragmatic one, always reminding her of their goal, always pushing them to keep going, even if it meant sacrificing even more.
So, how did they finally do it? What was the turning point that allowed them to finally get on the ladder?
Well, they both hit 34 last year. And they decided they just couldn't wait anymore. They had built up a decent deposit, about £30,000, but it definitely wasn't enough for the 3-bedroom house they really wanted in their preferred neighborhood. So they had to compromise. Big time.
Which is the reality for so many first-time buyers now, isn't it? You rarely get your dream home first time around, it's more about getting *anything star.
Exactly. They looked much further afield, to a slightly less desirable area on the outskirts of London, a longer commute for both of them. And they decided to go for a 2-bedroom flat instead of a house, knowing it was a stepping stone, not their forever home. Even then, the mortgage was a huge stretch. They had to take on a 35-year mortgage to keep the monthly payments manageable, knowing they'd be paying it off well into their retirement.
35 years. That's a long time to be tied to a mortgage, a huge commitment.
It is. But they saw it as their only option, their only chance. They signed the papers in January of this year. Aisha told me it was a moment of pure, unadulterated relief, but also profound exhaustion. She said it wasn't the champagne popping, jumping for joy moment she'd always imagined. It was more like a quiet, collective sigh of "we finally did it." A profound sense of accomplishment mixed with the weight of the future.
And what does it feel like now, being in their own place, finally?
They've been in for a couple of months now, and they're slowly, lovingly making it their own. Aisha says every time she walks through the door, she still can't quite believe it's theirs, that they own the walls, the floorboards, the windows. They're still incredibly frugal, still careful with every single penny, because the mortgage payments are tight. But there's an undeniable sense of security, of having a place that's truly theirs, that makes all those years of saving and sacrifice, all those tears and moments of doubt, absolutely worth it.
And that's the real story behind the headlines, isn't it? It's not just about the average age, it's about the sheer grit and determination, the sacrifices and compromises it takes for people like Aisha and Ben to achieve that dream in today's world.
Absolutely. These stories are a powerful reminder that behind every statistic, every news report, there are real lives being lived, real struggles being faced, and real triumphs, big or small, being celebrated every single day.
That's UK Stories for today. These stories are inspired by real events, proof that real people face real financial battles every day, and some of them win against incredible odds. Subscribe, leave a comment, and we'll see you next time.